The Seraphian Empire was a place of beauty and strength, its people noble, its skies endless. But even in such a kingdom, peace could shatter like glass, and for Queen Lyra, that shattering had come in the form of war. The conflict had taken many lives, but none were felt more deeply than the loss of her daughter, Princess Zara. The young princess had been caught in the brutal fighting on the outskirts of the kingdom, and despite the best efforts of the Seraphian forces, her body had never been recovered. It was as if the princess had vanished into the war itself. Queen Lyra stood alone in her throne room, her wings folded tightly against her back, her face somber. It had been weeks since the battle that claimed her daughter, and the grief still weighed heavy on her heart. She had ruled with strength, but this loss, this deep and personal loss, was different. It shattered her in ways no sword or enemy could. Her advisors had tried to reassure her. They told her that her people needed her, that the war was far from over, that she had to remain strong. But every night when the kingdom fell silent, she wept for Zara, the daughter who would never come home. As the queen sat alone, gazing out at the distant horizon, a soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Your Majesty," came the voice of her most trusted advisor, Thaler. "A human envoy has arrived. He requests an audience." Queen Lyra sighed, rubbing her temples. The humans had been allies for years, but in the midst of her grief, she felt the weight of even their good intentions as a burden. "Let him wait," she said, her voice distant. But Thaler hesitated. "He insists on speaking with you, Queen. He claims he can help." At that, Lyra's curiosity stirred. "Help in what way?" "I do not know, my queen, but he speaks with great confidence." Lyra stood, smoothing the folds of her gown. "Very well, send him in." Moments later, Mark entered the throne room, standing tall despite the foreignness of the surroundings. He was human, his features different from those of the seraphs. He wore a simple jacket that spoke of his travels but also the seriousness of his mission. His eyes were kind but filled with determination. He approached the throne with a respectful bow. "Your Majesty," he greeted, his voice steady but warm. "I'm Mark from the Federation of Earth. I know this is an unexpected visit, but I believe I can help you." Lyra studied him for a long moment, wondering what this human might want, or worse, how he might exploit her kingdom's weakness. But there was something about him, his sincerity, his quiet strength, that made her pause. "You have my attention, human," she said, her tone both intrigued and cautious. "What is it that you can offer?" Mark stood a little straighter, meeting her gaze with no hesitation. "I've heard of the loss you've suffered, and I want to help you bring your daughter back." Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly, disbelief rising within her. "What do you mean? No one can bring back the dead." "I'm not talking about bringing her back from the grave," Mark said, stepping closer. "But I believe Zara is alive. I believe she's been taken, not killed. If you give me the chance, I can find her. I can bring her home." The room fell silent as Lyra took in his words. Her first instinct was to dismiss him outright. Her daughter was gone. It was too painful to hope, too risky to believe. But there was something in Mark's eyes, something that made her wonder, even if just for a moment, if he could be right. "I do not believe you," Lyra said flatly, though her voice lacked the harshness it might have held a moment ago. "But I will hear you out. Explain, then." Mark nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've spent years studying the Valons, the enemy responsible for your daughter's capture. They are ruthless, but they are not invincible. I know their tactics, and I've been trained to infiltrate their ranks." "You?" Lyra asked, incredulous. "A human trained to infiltrate? You've never faced their warriors?" Mark's lips curved into a small smile, despite the tension in the room. "I may be human, but I've faced worse. The Valons underestimate us, but we've survived because we adapt. If you'll allow me to, I'll go after your daughter. I'll find her and I'll bring her back." Lyra stood motionless, her gaze piercing through him. Every part of her screamed to say no, to protect her heart from more pain. But something in Mark's words made her hesitate. "You do not know what you ask," she said softly, almost to herself. Zara is my only child. My heart has already been shattered. I cannot lose her again. Mark's voice softened. I know the cost of hope, but I also know what it's like to lose someone you love. I won't make promises I can't keep, but I believe we can bring her home. Let me try. For a long moment, Lyra said nothing. She turned away, walking to the large window that overlooked her kingdom, her wings unfurling as if they could carry her away from the weight of her responsibilities. But deep down, she knew this was a chance, perhaps the only one she would ever get. Fine, she said finally, turning back to him. You have one chance. Go, but know this, if you fail, you will never return. Mark nodded solemnly. I understand, and I won't fail you. As he left the throne room, Lyra's heart was a mix of hope and fear. She wasn't sure if she truly believed Mark, but she couldn't help but wonder, what if the impossible was possible? The next few days were a blur of preparation. Mark had been given all the resources the Seraphians could spare, supplies, maps, and intel about the Valon strongholds. Despite all the help, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into the unknown. He wasn't just going after any missing person. He was going after the princess of the Seraphian Empire. This was bigger than anything he'd faced before. As he gathered his things, the Seraphian scouts briefed him on their findings. He had to infiltrate a heavily guarded fortress, where the Valons were known to imprison their most important captives. No one had ever returned from the Black Citadel, but Mark wasn't going to let that stop him. If Zara was alive, then she was worth every risk. The night before he left, Mark found himself standing outside the Grand Palace, looking up at the stars. The wind brushed his face, but the cold didn't bother him. It was a familiar kind of chill, the one that came when you were about to face something bigger than yourself. He had been on dangerous missions before, but this was different. The thought of Zara, lost in enemy hands, was like a weight on his chest. And the thought of Queen Lyra, that was what really kept him up at night. Her grief, her unshaken belief that her daughter was lost forever. Mark couldn't let that belief stand. Mark, a voice called from behind him. He turned to see Zara's mother, Queen Lyra, walking toward him. She was dressed in royal armor, her wings folded against her back, her gaze focused and intense. The moment she saw him, her eyes softened, but only for a moment. I was hoping I'd find you here, she said quietly, her voice a mix of sadness and determination. You're about to do something no one else has been able to do. You're going after my daughter. Mark nodded, unsure of what to say. He had never faced a challenge like this, but facing Lyra's gaze made it all feel even more important. I'm going to find her, I promise. Lyra stepped closer, her wings brushing against the ground, casting a shadow over him. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, doubt, maybe fear, but also hope. I need you to bring her back, please, for my people, for me. Mark swallowed. He had expected the weight of the mission to feel heavy, but this was something else. Lyra wasn't just the ruler of an empire. She was a mother broken by the loss of her child. I'll bring her back, he repeated, his voice firm. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was thick, filled with the weight of everything that had led them to this point. Finally, Lyra reached out and placed her hand on his arm, her touch surprisingly gentle. I won't forget this. If you succeed, you'll always have a place in the Seraphian kingdom. Mark gave her a reassuring smile. Thank you, I won't fail. Lyra nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Then she turned and walked away, her wings folding tighter against her back as she disappeared into the distance. Mark stood there for a while, lost in thought, before he finally turned to leave. He didn't know what the future held, but he was ready to face it. The journey to the Black Citadel was grueling. Mark traveled for days, crossing treacherous terrain and evading enemy patrols. Each day felt like a battle in itself, but he was determined. He kept reminding himself that this was for Zara. If there was a chance to save her, he had to take it. On the fourth day, he came to the edge of the vast forest that surrounded the citadel. His heart thudded in his chest as he gazed at the looming fortress in the distance. The Black Citadel was as ominous as its name, with dark stone walls that seemed to swallow the sunlight. There was no way to approach without being seen, but Mark wasn't here to play it safe. He had trained for situations like this, and he wasn't going to stop now. With a deep breath, Mark began the final leg of his journey, navigating through the dense trees and finding the hidden path that led to the citadel. It was slow going. He couldn't afford to make a single mistake. The Valons were ruthless, and if they caught him, he wouldn't have the chance to save Zara. Hours later, Mark found himself standing at the edge of the citadel's perimeter, hidden in the shadows. The air felt thick, like the weight of the place pressed down on him. The sound of distant footsteps echoed in the quiet, but Mark stayed perfectly still, watching the guards patrolling the walls. He knew the odds were against him, but he had come this far. Suddenly, he felt a presence behind him. Mark spun around, instinctively drawing his weapon, but the figure was not an enemy. It was a Seraphian scout, their face hidden behind a mask, signaling for him to follow. Without a word, Mark followed the scout deeper into the shadows, hoping this was the break he had been waiting for. As Mark and the scout approached the citadel's entrance, the scout whispered, "We have one shot at this. The princess is in the inner chamber. It's guarded heavily, but I know a way in." Mark nodded. "Lead the way." The scout motioned to the side, revealing a hidden door that led into the heart of the fortress. Mark's heart raced with anticipation. He wasn't just fighting for a mission anymore. He was fighting for the promise he had made, to Lyra, to Zara, and to himself. He stepped forward, knowing that the hardest part was still to come. But with Zara's life on the line, there was no turning back now. The Black Citadel loomed before Mark like a shadow that threatened to swallow him whole. It wasn't just the size of the fortress or its dark, foreboding walls that made it so intimidating. It was the weight of what lay beyond those walls. He wasn't just here to rescue a princess. He was here to bring hope back to a kingdom that had already lost so much. Mark moved silently through the shadows, his heart thudding in his chest, his every sense alert to the slightest noise. His breath was steady, but deep down he could feel the weight of the promise he'd made to Queen Lyra. He would not fail. Not now, not ever. Behind him, the Seraphian scout moved with swift grace, her wings folding neatly against her back as she guided him through narrow corridors and hidden passages. She was a trusted ally, and though they hadn't spoken much, Mark knew her trust in him was as solid as his trust in her. Together, they navigated the dark labyrinth that led them closer to their goal. After what felt like hours, they arrived at a large chamber deep within the citadel. The walls were covered with strange markings, glowing faintly in the dim light. It was a place Mark hadn't seen before. There were no maps that showed this part of the fortress. His instincts screamed that they were close, very close. The scout signaled for him to stop. "The princess is inside," she whispered, pointing to a heavily guarded room. Two Valon soldiers stood outside, their black armor gleaming under the low light. They were armed and alert, ready to stop anyone who dared approach. Mark's pulse quickened. He was ready. He could do this. But as he peered into the darkened room beyond the guards, he felt a sudden tightness in his chest. This was it. This was where it all came down to. The scout gave him a look, one that showed both uncertainty and determination. "We can't go in through the front. I know another way, but it's risky." Mark nodded without hesitation. "Lead the way. I'm not leaving without her." They moved quickly, staying low to the ground, weaving through narrow corridors, avoiding patrols and keeping to the shadows. They were getting closer, and Mark's heart pounded with each step. His mind was on Zara, her safety, her condition. He didn't know what he would find when they finally reached her, but he couldn't allow fear to slow him down. Finally, they reached a hidden entrance that led directly into the heart of the inner chamber. It was an unguarded side door, covered in vines, and much less secure than the heavily fortified walls outside. The scout made a quick motion for Mark to enter, her eyes scanning the surroundings. Once inside, the chamber was quiet. Mark's eyes scanned the dark room, his breath caught in his throat as he looked for any sign of life. Then, just as his hope began to falter, he heard it, a soft gasp from the far corner. There she was. Zara lay unconscious on a stone platform, her wings clipped and chained, her body pale but still breathing. She looked so fragile, so different from the fierce warrior he had heard about in stories. Mark's heart clenched at the sight of her, and for a moment he felt the weight of what he was doing. She was alive, barely, but alive. And now he had to get her out of here. Mark moved toward her slowly, not wanting to alert the guards. The scout was right behind him, her hands ready to unbind the chains that held Zara captive. Mark crouched down beside her, gently brushing a lock of hair from her face. She stirred slightly, and her eyes fluttered open, confusion and fear clouding her gaze. "Zara," Mark whispered softly, kneeling next to her. "It's me. I've come to take you home." Zara's eyes widened at the sound of his voice. Who are you?" Her voice was weak, barely audible, but there was a spark of recognition in her eyes. "I'm Mark," he said gently, offering her a small smile. "I'm here to help you. We're getting out of here." She blinked, trying to sit up, but the chains around her wrists kept her from moving. Mark could see the weakness in her eyes, but also the fire that still burned there. She wasn't going to give up. Not yet. How did you find me?" Zara asked, her voice shaky. "Your mother sent me," Mark said, his voice full of conviction. "Queen Lyra never stopped believing in you, and neither did I." Zara's eyes softened, and for a moment Mark could see a flicker of something close to hope. "My mother," she whispered. "She thought I was gone." Mark nodded, gently pulling at the chains that bound her. "Not anymore. We're taking you home." With the scout's help, they quickly freed Zara, and Mark helped her to her feet. She was weak, but her determination was clear. There was no time to waste. They had to move quickly before the Valons realized their prisoner had escaped. "We need to get out of here," Zara said, her voice stronger now, the fire of a warrior igniting within her. "I won't let them take me again." Mark smiled, feeling a swell of admiration for her strength. "I wouldn't dream of letting them take you, not after everything we've been through." With Zara leaning on him for support, they moved quickly through the dark corridors, staying close to the shadows. Every step brought them closer to freedom, but the danger was far from over. They would have to fight their way out of the citadel, but with Zara by his side, Mark felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were going home, together. Mark's heart was pounding as he helped Zara move through the shadowy corridors of the Black Citadel. Every step felt like a countdown, the seconds ticking away, each one making it more likely that they would be discovered. His mind raced, running through escape plans, keeping an eye out for guards and hoping they weren't too late. But as he looked at Zara, her eyes determined, her strength slowly returning, he knew one thing for certain: there was no turning back now. They had to make it out. Zara's wings, now free from their chains but still weakened from the imprisonment, folded close to her body. She had always been a fierce warrior, but now she seemed like a shadow of her former self. Still, the fire in her eyes was unmistakable. This was a woman who had survived and fought, and she wasn't about to give up now. "Are you okay?" Mark asked quietly, glancing over at her as they moved deeper into the Citadel's labyrinth. Zara nodded, though her voice was soft, still hoarse from the lack of use. "I will be, just give me a moment." Mark stopped, his eyes scanning the corridor ahead. There was an occasional guard passing by, but nothing that would slow them down. He turned to face Zara, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. "We're close. We'll make it, just a little more." She smiled back, though her exhaustion was evident. "I can't believe I'm even alive right now. If not for you, I don't think I'd be." Mark shook his head, his smile becoming more sincere. "You would have made it out. You're stronger than anyone I know." Zara met his gaze, her eyes bright despite the pain she was clearly in. "Maybe, but it's nice to hear it anyway. You don't know what it's like being locked away like that, thinking no one would come." Mark's heart ached for her. He couldn't even begin to imagine what she had endured. The thought of someone so strong being kept in chains was nearly unbearable. "You're not alone anymore, Zara. We'll get you back to your people. I swear it." They moved again, their steps lighter now, their pace quickening. Mark was careful not to push Zara too hard, but he could feel the urgency of the moment. Every second mattered. He knew that soon the Valons would realize their prisoner was gone. He couldn't let that happen. As they rounded a corner, Mark froze, his hand gripping Zara's arm. Ahead of them, two guards stood near a door, talking quietly. Mark's stomach twisted in fear. There was no way they could sneak past them without being noticed. Zara glanced at him, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the situation. "We can't turn back now," she said quietly. "We'll have to fight." Mark nodded, drawing a weapon from the supplies he had been given before entering the citadel. "I've got your back," he whispered. Without another word, they advanced toward the guards, moving swiftly and silently. When they were close enough, Mark made the first move, knocking one guard unconscious with a quick strike to the neck. Zara was already moving, taking down the other guard with a fluid, practiced motion that left Mark in awe. She was still strong, still the warrior he had been told about. "Nice," he said with a grin, as the last guard crumpled to the floor. Zara gave him a quick smile, though it was tinged with exhaustion. "I used to do that every day. Feels strange, being on the receiving end." Mark chuckled softly, helping her through the door the guards had been standing near. "You'll be back to it in no time." They continued their journey through the citadel, slipping past more guards, always staying in the shadows and using their wits to avoid detection. Mark had never felt such a rush. But it wasn't just the thrill of the escape, it was the way he felt when he looked at Zara. It was a feeling that had started as a simple promise to Queen Lyra, but now, with every step they took toward freedom, Mark couldn't ignore how much he cared for her. And judging by the way Zara's eyes lingered on him, the feeling was mutual. They finally reached the outer walls of the citadel, and Mark's heart soared. They were so close. But just as they were about to climb over the final barrier, an alarm blared, cutting through the quiet night. "Damn it," Mark muttered under his breath, his heart sinking. "They've found us." Zara's wings twitched, and she pulled herself up to the top of the wall, offering Mark her hand. "We have to go, now." Mark grabbed her hand, pulling himself up after her, just as soldiers began to rush toward them from all sides. The two of them were on their own now. There was no way they could outrun the soldiers. But there was one thing they could do. As the soldiers closed in, Mark and Zara shared a glance, a silent agreement passing between them. Together, they launched into action. Zara's wings flared, sweeping through the air like a storm, pushing back their enemies with powerful gusts of wind. Mark, using the skills he had honed on the run, took down the nearest soldiers with quick, decisive movements. The fight was short but intense, and soon the soldiers were retreating. Mark and Zara were left standing on the wall, panting and covered in dust, but they were free. Zara turned to him, a mixture of exhaustion and relief on her face. "We did it." Mark smiled, his chest swelling with pride. "You did it. I just followed your lead." Her eyes softened as she looked at him. "I couldn't have done it without you." For a brief moment, the world seemed to stop. There were no more enemies, no more battles to fight. It was just the two of them, standing on the edge of the Black Citadel, the weight of everything they'd been through lifting just slightly. And in that moment, Mark realized something he hadn't fully admitted to himself. He wasn't just rescuing a princess anymore. He was falling for her. And judging by the way she was looking at him, she might feel the same. The night air felt different now. It was cooler, the weight of danger still hanging around them, but Mark and Zara had made it out. The Black Citadel, looming like a dark shadow behind them, seemed a lifetime away. They had escaped, but the price of freedom wasn't without its consequences. As they moved farther from the citadel, the adrenaline that had fueled them during their escape began to fade, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Zara leaned on Mark more now, her strength returning but still fragile from the ordeal. He could see the struggle in her, the warrior within her not wanting to admit weakness, but it was there. And despite everything, Mark found himself wanting to protect her more than ever. They walked in silence for a while, the sounds of their footsteps mingling with the distant calls of alien creatures. The stars above were as bright as ever, but the silence between them felt heavy, like something unsaid was waiting to be spoken. "Thank you," Zara said finally, her voice quiet but sincere. "You saved my life. I didn't expect a human to come for me." Mark glanced at her, a small smile pulling at the corner of his lips. "You didn't expect a human to be able to do anything, huh?" Zara chuckled softly, the sound like music to Mark's ears after everything they had been through. "Maybe not, but you've surprised me, more than once." Mark's heart skipped a beat at her words, and despite the fatigue weighing on him, he felt a warmth spread through him. "I'm glad I could prove you wrong," he said, his voice light. They continued walking, Mark helping her through the uneven terrain as they moved further into the wilderness. The journey wasn't over, no, they still had a long way to go before they reached safety. But in that moment, Mark couldn't help but think that this shared experience had already changed everything. They were no longer strangers. They were partners, survivors. And there was something undeniable between them. After a few more moments of quiet, Zara looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Mark, tell me something." "Anything," he replied, his voice steady but curious. She hesitated, her wings shifting as if to find the right words. "What made you come for me? You didn't have to, you barely knew me." Mark slowed his steps, glancing at her. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the truth, but even as he thought about it, his heart thudded harder in his chest. "I didn't come for you because I was supposed to," he began, his voice softer now. "I came because I couldn't imagine leaving you behind. I promised your mother I'd bring you home, but it wasn't just that. It's you, Zara. From the moment I saw you in that cell, I knew I had to do whatever it took, because I care about you. More than I thought possible." Zara's gaze softened, her expression unreadable for a long moment, but then a small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "I care about you too," she said quietly, her voice holding a hint of vulnerability Mark had never heard before. "I didn't think I'd ever let anyone in again, not after everything I've been through, but you made me feel like I wasn't alone, like there was hope." Mark felt his chest tighten. He wanted to reach out to her, to hold her close, but he knew they couldn't afford to get lost in this moment, not yet. "You're not alone, Zara, not anymore." She met his gaze, her eyes filled with something deep, something he hadn't quite seen before. It was more than gratitude, more than the bond they had formed through the chaos. It was something real, something that didn't need words to explain. "Promise me something," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Promise me that no matter what you'll be there, that we'll do this together." Mark reached out, taking her hand in his, the connection between them strong and undeniable. "I promise," he said, his voice full of conviction. "I'll be there, Zara. We're in this together and nothing will change that." For a long moment they stood there, hand in hand, their eyes locked, feeling the weight of their shared promise. It was more than just survival now. It was a bond formed from trust, from fighting side by side, and from an unspoken understanding that whatever this was between them, was just the beginning. But as they continued their journey through the wilderness, Mark knew one thing for certain: he would protect her. He would always protect her. Whatever came next, whatever dangers they faced, he would stand by her side. They walked for hours, the moonlight guiding their path, each step drawing them closer to safety, but also closer to something deeper. The connection between them had shifted in a way neither of them had expected, but they both knew they had crossed a line from mere survival to something else, something that felt like hope. And as they reached the edge of a hidden valley where they could rest, Mark allowed himself a small breath of relief. They had made it this far, together. "Tomorrow will be safe," Mark said, his voice hopeful. Zara nodded, a small, tired smile gracing her lips. "Tomorrow," she echoed, "we'll be free." And as they settled down for the night, the stars above shining brightly in the vast, alien sky, Mark couldn't help but feel that the future, though uncertain, had never seemed so full of promise. The days following their escape from the Black Citadel were full of tension, but there was a quiet sense of relief that settled between Mark and Zara. Every step they took away from the fortress was a victory, but with each passing hour, the reality of the world they were walking through set in. They weren't just running, they were beginning to rebuild. Rebuild trust, rebuild hope, and in some small way rebuild themselves. Mark couldn't help but notice the way Zara's strength seemed to grow with each day. Her wings, though clipped and damaged, were starting to regain their grace. The way she moved, the way she spoke, it was as if she was shedding the fear that had kept her captive in the citadel. With every step, she became more of the warrior he had heard about, more of the woman who had stolen his heart without him even realizing it. And for his part, Mark was feeling something new too, something he hadn't expected but now couldn't deny. The more time he spent with Zara, the more he found himself drawn to her in ways he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about her strength or her beauty, though both were undeniable. It was the way she made him feel. Like he wasn't just some human caught in a galaxy far from home. He was part of something, with her. And that thought was enough to give him the strength to keep going. That afternoon, they reached the edge of a thick forest, the final obstacle between them and the safety of the Seraphian border. They had traveled for hours, hiding from patrols, moving under the cover of night. Now the sun was setting, casting an orange glow across the sky. Mark and Zara stopped for a moment, both of them looking out over the forest, knowing that the next steps would be the hardest yet. "Once we cross into the border," Mark said, his voice steady but tired, "we'll be safe, at least for a while." Zara nodded, her expression distant. She looked over at him, her eyes scanning his face as if she were studying him. "You've been incredible, Mark. I don't think I've said that enough. You didn't have to come for me. You could have just walked away." Mark met her gaze, his heart tightening. "I couldn't walk away. I promised your mother, and I promised you. I'm not the kind of guy who breaks promises." Zara smiled, the faintest hint of something softer in her expression. It was rare to see her like this, vulnerable, exposed. But in that moment, Mark felt closer to her than ever before. "I'm glad you didn't walk away," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. Mark's heart skipped a beat at her words. He wanted to say something in return, but before he could, Zara turned her gaze back to the forest ahead. There was something heavy in the air, a sense of finality hanging between them. The safety of the border was so close, yet it still felt so far away. Suddenly, Zara stepped forward, breaking the silence. "I know what you're doing," she said, her voice calm but with an edge to it. Mark looked at her, confused. "You're holding back." Mark blinked, unsure of what she meant. "Holding back." She nodded, her eyes searching his face again. "You've been taking care of me, guiding me, keeping me safe. But I know there's more you're not saying." Mark felt his throat tighten. "Was it that obvious? I don't know what you mean." Zara took a step closer, closing the distance between them. "I think you do." She reached up and touched his arm gently, her fingers warm against his skin. "You're scared, aren't you? Scared to let yourself feel anything for me, because you know I might disappear again, because of the danger." Mark opened his mouth to protest, but the words didn't come. He couldn't deny it. He had been afraid, afraid that once they were safe, once they were home, they would go their separate ways. Afraid that this bond, this connection, would just be another casualty of war. And deep down, he had been afraid of letting his feelings grow because of the uncertainty. Mark began, but Zara cut him off with a smile that was gentle but full of understanding. "You don't need to explain, Mark. I understand. I've been where you are. I've been alone, fighting, trying to push others away, thinking I could handle it all by myself." She stepped even closer, her presence calming him in a way that no one else ever had. "But you don't have to be alone anymore. Not with me." Mark's heart beat faster as she spoke, the walls he had built inside himself beginning to crumble. He had been fighting it, fighting the growing connection between them, but now, with Zara standing in front of him, there was no denying it. He couldn't hold back anymore. Not when she was right here, not when the weight of everything they had been through was so real. Without thinking, Mark reached out, his hand gently cupping her face. Zara didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a moment as if savoring the warmth of his hand. Mark leaned forward, their faces only inches apart now, his breath quickening. "Zara," he whispered, his voice low, "I don't know what comes next, but I know I want you in it. I want you." Her eyes opened, and for a moment the world around them disappeared. There was no danger, no war. There was just the two of them, two souls, intertwined by something that went beyond survival. "I want you too, Mark," she whispered back. And then, without another word, their lips met. It wasn't a kiss born of desperation or fear. It was a kiss born of something deeper, something that neither of them could fight anymore. A promise, a connection, a beginning. As they pulled away, Mark couldn't help but smile. He knew their journey wasn't over, but in that moment, with Zara by his side, he felt like they could face anything. The days that followed their kiss were filled with a new kind of energy, one that wasn't just fueled by the urgency of survival, but by something deeper. Mark and Zara had crossed a threshold, and though the path ahead was still uncertain, it felt like they were no longer walking it alone. Their bond had shifted into something more than just allies in battle. It was something stronger, more permanent. As they continued their journey toward the Seraphian border, Mark noticed the change in Zara. Her strength, her confidence, everything that made her a formidable warrior was returning. It wasn't just her physical strength that had grown, though, it was her spirit. She was no longer a prisoner of the Citadel. She was a survivor, a leader, and most of all, she was free. They stopped for a rest at the edge of a small stream one evening, the water glistening in the fading light of dusk. Mark sat on a rock, tossing small pebbles into the stream, his thoughts drifting as he listened to the sound of the water. He was exhausted, but the peace in that moment felt rare, like they had finally earned it. Zara, who had been crouched by the water's edge, turned to him with a small smile. "You seem far away, human." Mark chuckled, looking up at her. "Just thinking about how far we've come. A couple of weeks ago, I didn't even know if you were alive. Now here we are heading home." Her smile faded slightly, but the strength in her eyes remained. "Home," she echoed, almost to herself. "I didn't think I'd ever see it again, but I'm not sure what it will be like even if we make it." Mark stood up and walked over to her, sitting beside her on the bank. "It'll be a new home, Zara, a better one. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." She looked at him, and for a moment there was a vulnerability in her gaze that she had been hiding for so long. "And you're okay with that?" she asked softly, her voice almost a whisper. "With all this, with me?" Mark reached over and gently took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You've been through hell and you're still standing. That's more than enough for me." Her eyes softened as she looked at their intertwined hands. "You don't know how much that means to me, Mark. I've never had someone believe in me like this. Not even myself." Mark smiled, squeezing her hand. "That's exactly why I'm here, to remind you of everything you are." Zara leaned her head against his shoulder, the warmth of her touch sending a wave of comfort through him. It wasn't just the physical closeness. It was the emotional connection that had been building between them. The journey had tested them both, but it had also brought them closer than they ever could have imagined. After a moment of silence, Zara pulled back slightly, her gaze meeting his. "Mark, I need to tell you something." He looked at her, concerned but patient. "What is it?" "I know we're fighting for a future, one that's better than what we've had," she began, her voice steady but full of meaning. "But I want you to know that I'm not just fighting for that. I'm fighting for us. For you." Mark felt his heart beat faster at her words. He had always known there was something special about their connection, but hearing her say it out loud made everything feel so real. "Zara, I want that too. I want a future with you." For a moment there was nothing but the sound of the stream and the gentle breeze rustling the leaves above them. Then Zara smiled, the kind of smile that lit up her entire face. "Then we'll build it, together." And in that moment, Mark realized that no matter what happened, no matter the battles ahead, they had something stronger than any enemy, any obstacle. They had each other. The following days were filled with challenges, but they faced them together. They crossed the Seraphian border without incident, and as they neared the capital, Mark felt a sense of pride swell in his chest. He had promised Lyra he would bring Zara back, and now he had. He had kept his word. The capital was alive with the sounds of celebration. News of Zara's return had spread quickly, and the streets were filled with Seraphian citizens cheering for their princess. Mark couldn't help but smile at the sight of her, standing tall and proud as she was reunited with her people. It was a moment that felt almost surreal. Zara, the warrior princess who had once been lost, now home and no longer a captive. As they entered the palace, Queen Lyra was waiting at the entrance, her eyes full of emotion. The moment she saw Zara, she rushed forward, embracing her daughter tightly. Mark stood back, giving them the moment they both needed, his heart swelling with happiness for them. Lyra pulled away, her eyes wet with tears. "I never thought I'd see this day, Zara. I thought I'd lost you forever." Zara smiled softly, her wings fluttering slightly. "You never lost me, Mother. I was always with you. And now I'm home." Mark stepped forward, quietly watching the family reunion unfold. It was a beautiful sight, Zara, the lost princess, now back with her family. He had done it. They had done it. Queen Lyra turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Mark," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "you brought my daughter back. You've done more than anyone could have asked. I will forever be in your debt." Mark shook his head, a smile playing at his lips. "I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it because she's worth it. She's worth everything." Zara glanced at him, her eyes soft and full of affection. "We're both worth it, Mark, and we're both finally where we belong." In that moment, Mark realized that this was only the beginning. They had faced the impossible and they had come out stronger. Together. Whatever the future held, he knew they would face it side by side. And as the stars began to rise over the Seraphian capital, Mark felt a deep sense of peace. He wasn't just a stranger in a foreign world anymore. He was part of something. He was part of this. The future, with Zara by his side, was wide open, and for the first time he wasn't afraid.